Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on something that I'm passionate about. Jerry gave a little bit of my background. I have spent the last 20 years of my career plus caring for other people's parents and grandparents. And the last few years, I found myself in personal caregiving situations. So by means of introduction, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my why I chose to be a caregiver, why I chose this path for a career for myself. And so this is my grandmother. Her name is Evelyn, and these are some photographs of her throughout our life together, her pre-life from me. And then during the end of her life, she, in the latter stages of Alzheimer's and dementia, cared for her brother, who you see in the photograph. And then the last photo is just she and I together, one of our last visits that we had together. So my grandmother passed away with Alzheimer's dementia about 1.5 to 2 years ago. And I was a long distance caregiver. I coordinated as many things as I could, but she lived several states away. And so she's my why of why I chose to do this for a living. And so for all of us, it's important for us to know what our why is. Sometimes we get so lost in the purpose of caregiving that we can forget why it is that we're even doing what we're doing. For me professionally, the pandemic's brought some unique challenges with our staffing and nursing. And so I found myself working floor shifts as a CNA, working in dietary, fulfilling many roles that I don't typically fulfill in my administrative position. And while that work is very physically taxing, I have found, again, my why for choosing this career path. And so when I interact with the residents and their families together and providing care, it really helps me remember. And so for each of us, identifying our why, so that would be an important thing. But let's talk a minute about what some of the barriers are to incorporating humor, laughter into our caregiving. For most people, definitely having humor in not so funny situations can be a very fine line. But I think also thinking when we're having fun caregiving, or we're having laughter or making jokes about maybe unfunny situations, at times it can seem disrespectful in perception to us. And so certainly in the field that I'm in, working in senior healthcare, we try to be very sensitive to the needs of our residents. But there are funny things that happen. So another part of my why for today is to tell you who I currently care for. This is my father, who has also been my life's best friend. My dad currently has stage 4 colon cancer. He has cancer in his lymph nodes, liver, and lungs. And so he lives in Kansas City, and I live here in Utah. And I find myself hopping a plane at this stage of life about every other week or every couple of weeks to take him to chemo and to take care of him. My dad's always been a private person, so think and imagine if John Wayne had raised you. This is my father, and so been very private about a lot of things in his life. And so this situation that we're in, I'm kind of living this right now. And so as the past weeks and months have ticked by, and the beginning of this diagnosis and figuring things out, and then trying to figure out how to run a business and be a mom and a wife and travel place to place to take care of him, I've kind of had to settle that and find some humor in some of the situations. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. And so defining your why, and then just finding opportunity. I wanted to share with you some of the funny things that I've experienced through my healthcare field. And so this one is just, and I just, when I had begun to understand Medicare Part D. And so we can take unfunny situations and we can find some humor and lighten the mood a little bit. So let's talk about health benefits of laughter and humor. There are lots of scientific studies that show that those who can incorporate laughter and humor into their caregiving experience improve sleep, a boost in their immunity, improve memory. Laughing is a great cardio exercise. A decrease in pain, a boost in heart health, better quality of life, and healthy support for a healthy immune system. And so those are just some of the many benefits in incorporating laughter and humor. In the long-term care setting, taking care of the residents that we care for, we see less psychotropic medications given to residents, less escalation of behaviors, and definitely less pain medications and narcotics that are given to our elderly folks that we take care of. And so the benefit is great for both the person that is caring and the person who's receiving the caregiving as well. So I want to demonstrate to you a little bit about what humor looks like for me in this situation. I have a really good friend who some of you may follow her on social media. It's called The Listening Ear, and she captures stories, life stories, and just very special moments of seniors of all walks of life, all places across the country, different religions, different belief systems, and hobbies and interests. And so when I knew that time was drawing nigh with my grandmother, I really wanted to capture some special moments with her. My grandmother at the end of her life, who I would say was my life's best friend, began to be in a situation at first where talking with me on the phone, she wasn't really sure who she was talking to. It progressed to a point where the last handful of visits that she and I had prior to her passing away, I would say in about an 18-month period, she did not have awareness necessarily of who I was. And I remember one of the first times I came to pick her up to take her to drive to see my dad, we were sitting in the car together, and almost, and shame on me because I know better, but when it's our own loved one, I'm holding the steering wheel and we're driving around to all these fun old places during my childhood, and places that were special and important to she and I. And I realized at that point, I was trying to make her live in a world and be someone that she no longer was, because my questions were almost like, hey, grandma, do you remember this house? And do you remember this? And it took me a while until I looked over and realized from her nonverbal communication that she had absolutely no idea who I was and why I had her in a car and where she was going. And so the end part of her dementia Alzheimer's process, it was a bit scary and difficult because it was a very different grandma than we had known before. And even though my head knows how all of this happens to everyone else's loved ones, when it was happening to mine, it was quite different. So the morning of the filming of Katie coming, I got a phone call that grandma was feeling ill and was not thinking that she wanted to leave the house, and she was living with a nearby family member. And I felt very discouraged. I had all this effort and time and money to get Katie to go back. And I had in my mind this perfect day that was going to happen to be able to capture my grandma's life history. And, you know, I wanted to give up, and I just got in the car and I drove over there anyway. And, you know, she may not have known my name, but the second I walked in the door, that frowny, sad face that wasn't feeling well said to me with a huge smile on her face, you know, my back will just hurt anywhere I go. So the footage that you're going to see is from that morning, and it couldn't be more beautiful. But if I'd given up, you know, we wouldn't have been able to capture. We have several hours worth of footage. This was at a time when we're interacting, and majority of the time my grandmother did not know who I was. But I want to show you how I incorporate humor into and almost use it to get her talking in a little bit. So I'm just going to play this video. I hope you guys can hear it. You guys hear it?
You weren't a very good cook. You have a lot of things that you are so good at.
I know, I burn everything.
But we'd laugh. We'd sneak pans out and throw them away so Grandpa didn't know. When I was a little girl, these were my favorite.
I know it.
You boxed these up and wrapped them up and said, "Happy Wedding Day." And I treasure these dancing shoes of yours.
Love everybody. You love people, they'll love you back.
It's true. You've had a pretty amazing life.
Still having it, honey.
I know. She told us
94, I'll reach 100.
She said it today. She's going for 100. You're aging and not always going to be with us. I struggle with that.
I'll be always with you.
Well, that was me and my person. When we first started this interview, the first camera roll, I just pulled those burnt pans out of my back pocket and had no idea it would work. because the grandma that I picked up that morning was scared and sad and had no idea who I was. Probably even worse, she felt like she needed to know or should know and didn't. And so that burnt pan and that laughter and that remembrance of that memory, and also with her being with my dad, she somehow would see my dad a lot of times towards the end and would associate me with him, and then would remember who I was. And so that rocky start of that morning, we just kept pushing through the right way with her and just being patient and kind and using a little bit of humor. And we got about 8.5 hours worth of just footage of telling old stories. We used photographs and objects to kind of jog her memory, and things like the shoes. And that laughter, for me, what that did for me is there was a memory of my grandma always burning pans, and what a funny situation that often was. We as grandkids trying to sneak those pans out to the trash before grandpa saw. And the fact that she remembered it back, I felt validated. And so that humor, just pulling out, especially for folks that have dementia, but also those that don't, who are maybe having a loss of self, to be reminded that they are someone who you shared a life with, that there are funny things that you remember, there are lovely things about them that you remember, is important too. For my dad, he's always been super private. And so having colon cancer and 2 daughters who work in the healthcare field who take care of him, you can imagine the daily "did you poop" calls that he gets from us now. It's opened up a lot of hilarious conversation. But what it's also done is opened our dad up to vulnerability, to trusting us more, to letting us do more for him. And his allowance of letting us do more for him helps me process my grief and guilt and sorrow, and I feel scared actually of what to come. And I've been a healthcare professional for 25 years, and I really heavy for me of what's to come at the end of this journey with my dad. I have every belief that he will be comforted and that we'll provide him with good care. But for me, having done it for thousands of other people and now doing it for my people, it's a very different experience. So that humor, I'll tell you a little story. A couple of weeks ago, we were doing some of his pre-planning, and I was very gentle through the whole process, but particularly when I started, I was terrified as a child of an aging parent that my dad was going to die of cancer tomorrow, is what it felt like a few months ago. And I was going to have no plan for him, and not my plan, but have had critical conversations. One of the conversations that came up, my dad has never not worn blue jeans his whole life. Shirt generally is optional. He's a dirt contractor, so worked in construction all of his life. And if he did wear a shirt, it was an old Western button-up. So for me, I would have probably put my dad in a pair of cowboy boots and his jeans and his cowboy shirt. And because we had a sense of humor and we also had a commitment to getting through some of these hard things together, he was able to share with me that he didn't want to be buried in blue jeans. He wanted to be buried in a suit. And I can count the times that I've ever seen my father in a suit on 1 or 2 fingers, maybe. So, but had we not had that conversation and there was some humor and laughter in that, I wouldn't have known his wishes. We recently went to the mortuary in doing some of his pre-planning, and he said to the guys in the mortuary, "Well, is that your cheapest casket?" And they said, "Well, yes, sir." And he said, "Well, that's what I want." And I said, "Dad, that's a pink casket." It was a rose gold casket. And he said, "Well, I don't care. I don't care what they bury me in. It's cheapest. That makes sense, And I said, "Well, the silver one is just $500 more. I think that's more your style." By the end of the conversation, the gentlemen at the mortuary were rolling with laughter. But my dad and I very aggressively in just the past 12, 15 weeks have had to accomplish a lot of hard things. We've laughed a lot, but through that laughter and humor, and then through his willingness to show vulnerability, we've really gotten down to some really beautiful, wonderful conversations. And if he were gone tomorrow, I wouldn't have had anything unsaid or undone with him, nor he with I. So let's talk a little bit about our next joke. So grandpa's computer repair, a couple hammers there. I've collected lots of these funny things. But in reality, aging and what we all face as we grow old, it's not a laughing matter, but there can be some bright spots if we allow them to be. So how do we incorporate humor into our caregiving situations? We can search for funny stories. One of my favorite writers for all of those that I have cared for, I'm a recreational therapist in the beginning of my career, is Shel Silverstein. He writes some hilarious little poems. These particularly work well with people with dementia because they're kind of short and sweet and get right to the punch, but there's always kind of a funny irony to them. And so I do a lot of reading of poetry like Shel Silverstein to our residents. So for those of you that are taking care of loved ones with dementia, that might be a fun Christmas gift this year to try, but they're pretty funny. One of my favorite ones, I used to have a great aunt who was developmentally disabled, and I was her caregiver, and we would read a lot. And her favorite one was, "I gave you a chance to water the plants. I didn't mean that way. Now zip up your pants." And every resident with dementia, they roar with laughter. Also brain teasers and some of those old sayings. The other day, I was walking into one of my communities, and one of my residents who was declining with a lot of dementia was sitting on the front porch, and I just started to sing the old song "To Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood," and she just piped in and sang with me, and it was just a fun moment. And so music, funny stories, watching funny movies together, comedies, getting online, a lot of people that even my kids, I think intergenerationally, people love to watch like animal videos and funny things that cats do and things like that. That can really lighten the mood as well. Spending time with funny friends. I have a brother-in-law. I'm going to show you a video here just at the end, but he's always bringing humor into things. And it's when you see the video, it's his voice actually talking to our grandmother. But when I'm around him or other people like him, I feel uplifted. I feel the mood just is completely different. Even right now at our father's home where things are heavy, a lot of times we're doing hard things. My cute brother-in-law is just jolly and fun, and he lightens the mood, and he can make really stressful situations just so much better. And then keeping a humor journal. For me right now, one of the ways that I'm processing what I'm going through with my dad and my own emotions is I started keeping a caregiving journal, and every day I just write down things my dad says to me, how I'm feeling, what my fears are, my to-do lists of him for things for him. And so for me, this is a caregiver's everything journal. I don't know, I haven't decided yet, but keeping a funny humor journal can later on be a great storybook, as I think this will be, and for me to go back and review my own processes as a caregiver. And even since the time I started this journal, to now, it's really become a healthy outlet for me to be able to express what I'm feeling. But there are some quite hilarious things that my dad says and does. And so we had an interesting experience with him a few weeks ago. He was 3 cycles into his first round of chemo. And the first couple of cycles he did really well. And then all of a sudden he called me one day and he was just mad at everybody but me over the most ridiculous things. And so this went on for a few days, and I did some more reading, and I discovered that the medications that he's taking, particularly the steroids, were giving him chemo rage. And so we were able to call the doctor and back off of those medications. But my siblings and I had some quite hilarious conversations about the things that dad was getting frustrated about, not in being disrespectful, but also almost in warning one another. And so here's a little bit, after we get past our next joke, I want to show you the next video. But if you mean getting daily massages from hot guys in tiny swimsuits, then yes, I'm all for moving into assisted living. We do not provide those services, but it's awfully funny. And good old Maxine, she knows how to make you laugh. So why does humor matter? It brings people together. It adds positivity to conversations. It assists us in comforting during difficult emotions. It enhances our dignity. And let's talk about that one for a minute, because you would think that maybe laughter and humor could do just the opposite. But a lot of times when you are working with someone, and I was in someone's home the other day where her mother was having difficulty transferring from her bed to her chair. And the daughter was just kind of using humor and just saying, well, that darn sheet won't get out of our way. And so when you can kind of make excuses, sometimes when the person we are caring for is having difficulty processing or can't remember someone, you kind of just move things along the right way or kind of make light or make a joke. It can be a very useful redirectional, validating way to kind of move them past the barrier that they're experiencing, particularly in language difficulties when they're trying to find a word or frustrated because they can't. Giving them adequate time, most definitely, to respond, but then moving things along and moving past that deficit and that situation is helpful to them. So I think in that way, it can enhance the dignity of the people that we're taking care of. It gives everyone a better quality of life, and it helps us understand ourselves and others better. And so most certainly I'm experiencing this in my current caregiving situation with my father, where we are talking on a different level than we've ever talked our entire life. And it almost feels a little bit like time is running thin, and we're more serious about the most important things in life. And then sometimes for me, he just needs to call and talk. And as a daughter who does live far away, sometimes I'm on the phone for 2 or 3 hours. I can have all my bathrooms and my floors mopped and all my housekeeping done. And I've been still productive, but I've also been more productive because I listened to the 3 hours of stories that my dad has to tell. And within all those stories, there's a lot of golden nuggets. And so that's what I've used my journal for too, so that I don't lose those. So in closing, I just want to show you kind of one last video. The picture that you'll see is of my grandparents dancing on my dining room table when I was a young girl. And the information is very enlightening that comes out of this humorous situation.
And look at you here, kissing on a table? That's wow. PG-13.
Yeah. I was probably drunk.
No. Standing on a table drunk? That's dangerous. You was probably dancing up there too.
I was dancing.
Grandma, I didn't know that you ever got drunk.
I didn't around you, Eddie.
It's really true.
She had an image to uphold. She was grandma at that time.
I couldn't get drunk when I was working.
You had responsibilities with the grandkids.
Yeah. I had to hide it from the kids all the time.
Oh, well, you were fun with or without it. It didn't matter.
So that photograph, my brother-in-law kind of just teasing her a little bit, and we got that golden nugget of a moment. I had to hide it all the time. And for me, when I said, oh, Grandma, I didn't know that you did those things. Well, I actually really did know, but we were just in that laughter, that light moment, kind of capturing that memory. And we have 8 hours of footage like this, but if you saw the person that I picked up that morning that was scared and confused and not feeling well, the fact that we were able to have these beautiful moments and kind of have her remembrance for a time open up was just really special for us. And so some of these things, I tell stories about once we were picking strawberries in this very large strawberry patch in Blue Springs, Missouri, where she raised us. And we spent hours picking strawberries, and then she got back to the car and told us that she had lost her keys. So we had to go all the way back and retrace our steps so we could find her keys and go home. So, well, I hope that's helpful, a little bit about incorporating humor. And I hope that all of you just know how special and important you are to those that you take care of in the greater community, and how loved you are by Mountain Lands and by all of us that serve and helping. So thanks so much for having me speak today.